The most important lesson from the book was the lesson that I forgot to write and didn't put in the book. And that was that, and as I like to say it, not mincing words, is don't get fat.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kim Barrett Show. I am your host, Kim Barrett, and on today's episode, we are joined by Glenn Poulos. Glenn has sold companies, sold products. He's a little bit of the sales expert, you would have to say. So today we're joined by him, and we're sharing some of his stories from growing these companies, selling these companies, and also a little bit about his book, Never Sit in the Lobby. So if that's something you want to hear, make sure you tune into this episode. And of course, if we can ever help you with your marketing to get you into the lobby with those businesses you want to do business with, then head over to our free Facebook community, www.joinmygroup.com.au. We go live every week, free training on helping you achieve all of your marketing goals and more. But until then, let's jump into the show. Glenn, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you making the time.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kim. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Now, I always like to kick off the podcast the same way every time, which is if I met you at a party and we were chatting and I said, Glenn, what is it that you actually do? What's your go-to answer?
I usually sort of lead with, I'm kind of in sales or a salesman, but really I run a sales company, a company that, most companies sell products, but, it truly is a sales company where we represent companies from around the world. So I kind of lead with I'm a salesman or I run a sales business.
And what's, I'm always curious because my assumption is for salespeople that when you were a little kid growing up, you probably didn't say to everyone when they're like, what do you want to be when you get older? I want to be a salesman. Like probably wasn't the best thing. I'm assuming. What got you into the world of sales?
Yeah, our slang is we call them peddlers, right? That's our euphemism. We call each other, right? Well, the funny thing is that I had the most diametrically opposed job to a salesperson prior to being in sales, which was I was a government employee, a civil servant, if you will, working for the federal government. And I'm in Canada. I'm in near Toronto, and in Canada, the weather service called the Department of Environment Canada. And I worked for Environment Canada. I went to school for electronics, and I was fixing electronic stuff. And my boss, ex-military guy, he pulled me aside one day and he said, dude, you're in the wrong job. You should go into sales. And, I was so young and impressionable. I don't remember, questioning him why and, what are the facts on this. I just took him up on the suggestion and started looking for sales jobs. And shortly thereafter, I quit my guaranteed pension job with the government and I went into the wonderful world of sales.
And what attracted you into that world? Because as you say, obviously having that, government pension, pretty much like one of the most probably secure jobs that there is. What made you take the leap into uncertainty and I'm sure a world of commissions and having to hunt to eat?
And the funny thing is that as well is that I do run my own business. I sold the company in February actually, so and I would have to stay for about 3 years, but I've looked back in the last number of years. I've been to a number of retirement parties for all of the civil servants I used to work with that have all put in their requisite amount of time, and now they've got their guaranteed defined benefit pension and everything. I'm still I'm like, have I done this correctly or what? Right. But I suppose in a few years I'll get to retire. But so I went for, I actually didn't apply for a lot of jobs. I really only applied for one job, and I got the interview, and I think and I do tell the story in the book, but I went for the first interview, and the guy's name coincidentally was Kim, and so I went for the interview. The next day in the morning, I followed up. I called and I said, have you made a decision, right? And they're like, no, we haven't. No, not yet. So that afternoon, I phoned again, right? And I asked, and I said, have you guys made a decision? And they said no. And then the next day, I phoned, and they started screening me at that point, right? And the lady's like, I'm like, well, is Ken there? And no, Ken's busy. He's tied up. And I'm like, oh, has he made a decision on that sales job yet? And no. And so, a week or 10 days later, Kim calls me and he says, Glenn, you're going to Montreal. And I'm like, okay, sounds great. So now remember, I work for the government and I was driving around Ontario, Canada, near Toronto and stuff. And I was fixing all this electronics. And the car that they gave me at the government was I think it was like a Chevy Chevette. It was think of, in the 1985, the cheapest possible car that you could ever sit in it was crank windows, no radio, no air conditioning, nothing like that at all. And that's what I was driving around with my tool bag. And so I'd fly to Montreal, and one of the other owners of this sales company was picking me up at the airport. And he rolls up to the Montreal airport, and he's driving a BMW 750. And of course, being the young, impressionable dude that I was duly impressed, right? And I get in this car and I'm like, holy shit, this sales looks like a great career, right? And so we roll into the office, and there's 4 owners to the company. 3 of them were in Quebec, and when he pulled into his parking spot, beside him were 2 more BMW 750 cars, and they had license plates that were like 1 digit apart, right? And I said, I'm definitely going into sales. There's just no questions about it. This is the perfect job for me, right? So I did the interview in the Quebec, and they sent me back home. And a few days later, Kim called me, gave me the job, and then he hired me. And the punchline of the story is that when he said he brought me in, he goes, we didn't want to hire you. And I'm like, what? Well, why did you hire me? And he said, you were the only one that followed up twice a day for 10 days. So we figured, if you do that much to get the job, we know how much you do to keep the job. And so we decided to take a chance on you. And, but what it really attracted me to it was that former military dude, he said, he explained that there was good money in it. And he gave me this saying that money flows out of a pen, Glenn, not out of a toolbox. Right. And, so, I guess making more money, you'll make more money, writing out contracts than you will fixing, weather stations and things like that. So I was, there's a chapter in my title that's actually titled Greed-Based Learning. And so my greedy little nature, I just, I thought, hey, this is the perfect job for me. I want to make lots of money. And so I jumped into sales.
What was the growth from there? Obviously, like having your own company and writing books on sales and things like that. Like, what was some?
Well, actually, I will tell you, but I will, and I'll tell you the short story just to be, for brevity. But I've actually started and sold 2 companies. Both of them were in business for 15 years. Both of them sold for well into the 8 figures, and except. What happened with the first one was not what you would ultimately call an ultimate success, which I'll explain quickly. But the second one, which I sold in February, was a resounding success, and I'm quite happy about that. But so, and just to tear the Band-Aid off that story, and then I'll tell you how I did that. We were approached by a public company to do the process of an RTO, or reverse takeover. And this was about 17 years ago. And I wasn't very sophisticated in the area of, the public markets and, and some of these deals and how I was really, kind of deer in the headlights about all that, but they were throwing millions of dollars of shares at me. And so, but not a lot of cash. Okay. And they own many other companies in Canada and elsewhere, and including some large cell phone stores. And at face value, it looked like a very successful company. And of course, the owner, not the owner, but the CEO was driving an Aston Martin DBI or DB9 or something like that anyways. And DB something. And so I guess we didn't do our proper due diligence on them like they did on us. And they basically, we were a division of this public company, and I owned a lot of the shares, and they were worth millions of dollars when they bought us, but they started sucking us dry for money as an operating unit to pay for a lot of other units that we didn't know about at the time. And within 18 months, to make a long story short, they bankrupted our division, and 100 of us were out of work. but ultimately the shares crashed and dropped to a sub a penny. And my millions and millions of dollars of shares, I couldn't sell them because I was an insider. I was actually one of the largest, the largest shareholder actually in that public company at the time. I was the founder of the original company they bought, and I had more shares than anyone else. And they went to almost zero. And so people are like, well, why didn't you jump off a bridge, or how did you survive? Like, losing all that billions and millions of dollars. And I'm like, I didn't have millions of dollars. Like, I had my company and I made good money, and it was doing fine. And we were, we're in the technology space, particularly in the wireless space, and we were doing great. And, and I mean, I was had what we considered to be like a good living. And then all of a sudden I got millions of dollars of shares, which I couldn't sell. So my life didn't change. And then I still had a job and I still made decent money. And so my life never changed, right? And then all of a sudden, here today, gone tomorrow. I just didn't have it anymore. But I didn't have a job either. So now I had no income. And so I had to start over. But I worked how I got, into these companies was I was working for a similar company, and our business model, the Kim that hired me, they represented companies from around the world, technology companies, and they were selling primarily like instruments that electronic engineers use to do their jobs, like all kinds of like measuring instruments. It's a large field, electronic measuring instruments. And at the time, the big name was like Hewlett Packard, which is now called Keysight, but Tektronix, Roden Schwartz, these are big global names at measuring instruments. And these are the kind of products we were selling. And so for 5 years, I sold these products, and I had my territory, and I was a salesman and carried my bag and made calls, and I have all sorts of rules in my book about how I got the door and, how I conducted myself as a salesperson like that. And after 5 years, it was 6 months before I turned 30, I had this goal. I wanted to be, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to start a business before I turned 30. And so I approached them, and it was October of 1991. And I said to them, look, I've got this idea. You've got all these vendors that you sell from around the world. I'd like to take two of them that was in this other specific technology space, that they weren't really focusing on. They were just lucky enough to have these couple of vendors. I said, I'm going to take these two, and then I'm going to go approach a bunch of other ones, and I'm going to get like 10 of them. And I'm going to start another company, which I'll own, and you can own part of it as well. Now you'll own two companies, and I'll own part of this company. And the president said to me, he said, oh, you know what? Like, write out a plan, bring it to me, but I'm going to show you how it's never going to work. It's just basically keep your job and keep your nose clean or whatever. And so the next day I resigned, and I wrote out the plan was I resigned. And the second thing I did was I went home and I said, honey, because 6 days before I signed my resignation letter, I actually signed a marriage certificate. I got married 6 days before that. And I went, oh, by the way, honey, I quit my job. She's like, you what? And so I up and quit my job, and I convinced two other guys to quit their jobs in Ottawa and Montreal, and we started this company, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. We ultimately had people in Vancouver, and we grew it to 100 people. But the reason, he's saying, oh, it'll never work, and I can see why, because we based it on this like far-fetched, newfangled technology that everybody knew would never catch on, called the cell phone. And we were going to focus on the wireless game and particularly cellular technology, right? And 1991, the phone had been around like 5-6 years, something like that. And ironically, the name of the company that had hired me was called Interfax. Like, they didn't sell fax machines, but it was one of the biggest hurdles we always had. Oh, they're like, oh, do you sell fax machines? I'm like, no, I don't sell fax machines, right? And of course, the fax machine kind of, went up and down really quickly in terms of its usefulness, right? And so the cell phone actually, it kind of took off a little bit, kind of, sort of, as we know today, right? And so when this company bankrupted us, and I had to the government hired me out of college, and somehow I wangled together a way of applying for that job at my first sales job. But I never had a resume and any experience finding jobs or whatever. So I quit the government. I got that sales job 5 years later. I quit the job, started my company 15 years later. It was bankrupt and I didn't have a job and I didn't even know how to do a resume. And to me, it was more frightening to figure out how to fill out a resume and go on job interviews than it was to restart a company. And so I decided that I was going to restart the company, and I had made note of, some of the things around the way the business had evolved culturally, and that I didn't really like, but I'd lost sort of, at 100 people, I just lost control of the, all the messaging and what have you. And so I wanted to start a new company, and it was going to be, run a different way. And, and the core tenet of it is being a pleasure to do business with. And I mean, but truly being, not just saying that, truly living that. And we live that to this day. And so within a week, I incorporated a new company, and, my name, it's Glenn Poulos. So I started with my name, GP, my initials, right? I said, okay, well, my middle name is James, so Jip Wireless doesn't sound very good. So why don't you buy a vowel? So I bought a first vowel. I started with A, and I went with, hey, GAP. Oh, that's Gap Wireless. Okay, boom, it was named. In 10 minutes, I had the company named. And of course, I didn't realize a year later that the Gap clothing company would bring me to the trademark tribunal, for trying to put off, or whatever they call it, on the naming, right? And they wanted me to change the name, but I ended up winning on the basis that it was my name. But they were mad because the year we started our company, Gap Wireless, they came out with a new product called the Gap Wireless Bra, and they were so upset, PO'd, as they say, that whenever you would Google Gap Wireless, their bra would constantly come up underneath us, right? And they were so frustrated by that, right? But ultimately, we came to a settlement, and we got to keep the name Gap Wireless, and we were just acquired in February. I have a partner. We were acquired in February of 2022, a few months ago, by a U.S. company called NWS Wireless, much bigger company, and just it's a growing private equity kind of a thing. And we've agreed to stay on and help them grow the business for a number of years, and then, fade off into the sunset in a few years. And that's how it happened.
That's awesome. I love that story. That's really cool. And yeah. Then and then share a little bit as well about, obviously you mentioned that you've got a book there too with a few of these stories. Like, tell us, like, when did you decide to write that, and what's that book all about?
So the book, it's called Never Sit in the Lobby. And of course, so many people today, they sell on LinkedIn and stuff, and they're like, what lobbies? Who goes to the lobbies anymore, right? And I'm like, dude, I go to the lobbies. Like, we're a face-to-face selling, we're selling $100,000 systems, or we're selling antenna technology to, major carriers. We have to go visit them. Our stuff doesn't sell online. Absolutely not. And, but it's called Never Sit in the Lobby. And, a long time ago, when I was out working for that first sales company, I started to accumulate and watch what other people were doing. And some of them were good rules and some of them were bad rules, like rules to avoid and rules to emulate, right? So I started naming the rules after people, and I like the word factor. So I would call it like the Tony factor, the Brian factor, and things like that. And I would write them down, and I would keep track of them. And then I started repeating them to people, and I'm like, oh, you need to do the Tony factor on that one, and in the book, I had to change all the names, right? Because some of them are first name, last name kind of things. And so I had to come up with aliases to protect all the guilty. And the funny thing is now, it's like people are testing me like about, oh, well, what about this, the chapter? And I can't remember the made up names, but because I remember them for 35 years being the real person, right? And yeah. But anyways, so I started repeating them, and people would laugh and they say, oh my God, that's hilarious, or whatever. They say, oh, that's a great rule, or whatever. I'm going to remember that. And then a few guys caught on, and they said, hey, can you come to my company and tell my coworkers about some of your rules? And so I started doing some public speaking for for a short period of time at that time. And then a few people were pandering and saying, oh, you should write a book. And I'm like, oh yeah, you know what, I should. And of course, I promptly did not write a book, right? And all the time went by, but I kept writing down the rules over the years. Same book. I kept the same book all those years. And I would name it after a person, and I would write down the basics of the rules so that I would never forget it. Kind of like writing down punchlines to jokes. It's enough so that you can remember the joke, right? And over the years, I started accumulating them and whatever. And then in March 2020, Canada went into full lockdown for the pandemic. And of course, in Canada, probably similar to yourself, we were in a fairly rigid lockdown, right? Like virtually everything was closed. And of course, there was no entertainment, there was nothing public, and there was no fraternizing or whatever. So we were an essential service. So I had to go to work and keep my warehouse and my open. Most of my people went home, but I would go to work every day. I would come home at night. I'd have to stay at home on the weekends. We sat at home and did nothing, right? So I said, hey, there's the perfect time for me to write a book. So I Googled how to write a book, and the guy said, and it was actually a podcast, and the guy said, it's easy. He said, you just have to commit to writing 500 words every morning and you'll have a book in no time. And I thought to myself, well, I'm probably not going to do it every morning, but I would actually commit to writing 2,000 words between Saturday and Sunday, right? And which is my day off, and so I said, every day I'm going to write 2,000 words on the weekend until the book's done, right? And so I started that in March 2020. And then I found a service that provides editors and copywriting and copy editing, content editing, proof checking, fact checking, and then also help you with teaching you how to market the book, like how to get it on Amazon, how to format it. And it was really like a recipe system for writing books, but you actually do all the work and you get 100% of the rights. You're self-publishing it. It's published by Oak Blue Press. It's basically Oak is Oakville, Ontario is where I live. And then Blue is for Blue Mountain, where I have a ski chalet up north in Northern Ontario. So I came up with Oak Blue Press. That's who published the book, right? And, but yeah, so the joke is that I wrote 2,000 words until I got to 75,000 words. Then I sent it to the first content editor. And when she removed the F word from the book, I was now at 71,000 words. And she said, dude, you can't swear that much in a book. And she says, you can say the F word 3 times and God damn it, a couple, and that's it, right? And I'm like, okay, fine. We'll go with 71,000 words. And so they helped me with all that part of it. And in literally the week that I signed the business to sell my business, the book was launched on Amazon and other places in North America. And it was the best of times, the worst of times, right? Because this private equity firm was buying it. They were they're expecting 10,000% of my attention. And of course, you're launching a book and it's somewhat distracting. Let's put it that way, right? And so I probably could have timed it better, but it was just the book got delayed a bit and the bio got delayed a bit, and I couldn't get in the way of either one of them at one point. They overlap, but so February was a big month, and I've seen a few other people write books since then, and then they've all used that same sort of method of just saying, okay, these are my days, these are my times, and I'm going to turn everything off, do not disturb on the phone, and turn off the distractions and just get to that number, whether it's 500, 1,000, 2,000 words, and that it really does work. And literally anyone can do it. And, although I'm super motivated, I'm also like highly procrastinating in my nature as well. Right. Why would I do it today when I procrastinate until tomorrow? Right. And so, but I did set aside the time. And so anyone that's listening that is thinking about, hey, can I write a book? You really can. And you can just Google all these, book launching services, and they will help you to figure out all those parts. There's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. I don't think I would have figured it all out on my own, really, in a proper amount of time. So that's how I did it.
Awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
And then as we get towards the end of our time here together, I always like to ask the same question at the end of the podcast too, which is, Is there a question which I haven't asked you, which I should have?
Yeah. What usually one of the favorite questions I like to answer is, what's the most important lesson in the book, right? And so that's something that you haven't asked me, and it's definitely something that you should definitely.
So listen, what's the most important lesson?
Well, I'm going to give you a 2-part answer. Hope that's okay. Hope we can squeeze it in. So what I like to say is the most important lesson from the book was the lesson that I forgot to write and didn't put in the book. And that was that, and as I like to say it, not mincing words, is don't get fat, right? And I'm 60 years old now, and I lived a life of salespeople, dinners and things like that, and whatever. And my weight's been up and down, whatever. But, as I got older, and during the pandemic and whatever, I took my eye off the ball, and it's been incredibly difficult, to get that part back in order. And I mean, if you don't have your health and all that stuff, it's none of it. The rest of it is quickly, you realize isn't worth anything. So you want to make sure you keep that on point throughout, while you're working on your money and your game and your, and your business and what have you, is always focus on staying healthy and fit. Right. And the other lesson that I love sharing from the book is called "You Only Get Forever to Make Another Impression," right? And so a lot of people kind of like look up, going, "What do you mean?" I thought my mom said the first impression is the most important impression, right? I'm like, yeah, and every impression is the first impression. I said, and I always tell basically give them the analogy of, look, when your boss walks by and he looks over at you and he sees that you alt tab on your keyboard from Instagram over to the CRM and start tapping away, like, you can never do it fast enough. His eyes and brain are going to be all, he's going to see that you were right. You just made an impression, right? So pay attention to when you hear his footsteps in the hallway, and when you hear them, alt tab then. Don't wait, right? And always be making a good impression. When you see the bosses walking down the hallway, be on point. And then when they walk by, say, "Oh, you know what? Can I ask you a quick question? I'm working on this deal with so-and-so, blah, 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 blah." And always be on point. Always be making a good impression, because whether you know it or not, you're making an impression. The question is it a good one? So, that's one of the things I love to share. So.
I love it. And then, Glenn, for anyone that's listening and they're going, all right, I want to find out more about what Glenn's up to, you can find a copy of the book, things like that.
My website, which is glennpoulos.com, GLENNPOULOS.com.
Beautiful. We will have that linked up in the show notes. And for anyone, if you're listening to this, maybe you need a little bit of sales inspiration, or maybe you're spending too much time sitting in the lobby, make sure you share this episode with other people so they can hear a little bit of Glenn's wisdom from today. Glenn, really appreciate you making the time to jump on. It's been great chatting with you.
Yeah, same here. Thanks again.
Cheers.